All right, guys, today in front of me, I have the K.Luke batch number 5. So these K.Luke batches are blended by Jonathan and Jennifer Maisano using high and low rye mash bills from Kentucky and Indiana. Now, I've tried a sample of the number 4. I thought it was fantastic. Is this K.Luke batch number 5 better than that batch number 4? Let's find out. Alright guys, so as I stated, this is a blended straight bourbon whiskey using high and low rye mash bills from Indiana and Kentucky. This one comes in at 119.4 proof. Let's get in the nose. So further into the glass, I started to pull out like this powdered sugar note. It also reminds me of a little bit of like the some of the Big League Chew, like the original Big League Chew. Some of that powder, that little residue that's kind of left over on the chewing gum. I kind of get that note further into the glass. Further away from the glass, it's like a very thick, kind of heavy caramel note. But then there's also a little bit of like some lemon lime citrus going on there further away from the glass. Yeah, the more that this really starts to open up, the more like that powdered sugar and that heavy kind of caramel really kind of stand out. Again, I do get like a slight little like bubblegum note in there. There's also those hints still of that lemon lime. I have had this open now for a little while. I've been kind of putting this one off just to see if it changed up at all. So let's get the palate, guys. Cheers. So one of the first things I kind of notice on this one, there's a really nice. It's very oily. It's very concentrated. There's a lot of layers and depth to this whiskey. On the back end of this, there's a lot of baking spices. I mean, there's a lot of cinnamon. There's a lot of white pepper. There's some saffron in there for sure. Maybe a little bit of like some allspice as well. Back of the palate definitely dominated by some of those, again, some of those baking spices. But the oiliness from this and like that, it kind of leaves that like that residue in your mouth. Again, it's very concentrated, very silky. It just kind of gathers all those flavors and slowly kind of pulls them down into the finish. It's a medium to long finish, borderline on that longer side. But on the front of the palate, it's interesting. It's I get some darkness just to start on the front of the palate. I get some fig, and I also start like on the middle of the palate. I start to pull out a little bit of a cola note there as well. Beautiful first sip, and this glass is just super oily too. Yeah, dark fruit definitely kind of standing out there on the front of the palate. It's almost like a sugared kind of fig. Middle of the palate again, I start to pull out like that cola note there, and then right from the middle of the palate into the back of the palate, it transitions into this like just big burst of spice. And it wasn't as heavy as the first sip, but you're still getting a lot of those kind of baking spices. Just like all these baking spices just like kind of combined into this ball. And it's like, again, it's like white pepper and some cinnamon. Definitely some allspice, some saffron in there for sure. Gives it like a little bit of that like that earthy kind of feel there in the back of the palate. But with the oiliness, that kind of saturates the palate there, and it kind of leaves that residue, but it slowly kind of continues to pull these flavors down into the back of the palate. Slight little tobacco note that kind of shines through like into the finish. But man, I mean, you talk about like the thickness of this whiskey, and this whiskey is very layered. There's a lot of layers to this. I know on batch 4, when I tried batch 4, it didn't have that big burst of spice there on the back of the palate. Batch 4 was fantastic. I'm still looking for a bottle of that batch 4. Hopefully I'm able to come across one. But this one, again, this one supplies you with more of that big burst of like spice on the back of the palate. Beautiful flavors on the front of the palate, like that sugared fig, some of that cola that kind of shines through there. Not getting a lot of citrus on the palate at all, but once it transitions into the back of the palate, it's like that. It's just like baking spice galore, and it's so concentrated and thick and heavy. Really, really nice batch of whiskey here. This is damn good. Again, I'd have to try the batch 4 and the batch 5 together side by side just to see which I preferred. I mean, definitely from what I remember, vastly different batches. So it would just come down to preference at that point. Let's get a last sip, guys. Cheers. So now there on the front of the palate, I was getting like that sugared kind of fig. Some milk chocolate kind of appeared there on the front of the palate. Middle of the palate, still really picking up that cola note. Nothing else there with it. But again, that sugared fig, again, some of that dark fruit there sitting on the front. Some milk chocolate definitely made its appearance now. Cola note there sitting on the middle of the palate. And on the back of the palate, it's very odd. I get this very subtle hint of lime there on the back of the palate with those baking spices. Again, very baking spice dominant there on the back of the palate. It really lets you know it's there, and it's nice because having those baking spices there on the back of the palate, with it being as oily and viscous as it is, it really continues to pull those flavors down into the finish, that spiciness into the finish, which offers a very, very nice hug as it goes down. And again, I would definitely say this has a pretty long finish on this one. I know it was, the first couple sips didn't get me to that long finish point, but that last sip really kind of did it for me. This is a fantastic whiskey. Again, comparing it to batch 4, I know it's kind of hard unless you do a side by side, and I'm only basing that off of memory. Batch 4 was absolutely fantastic. I mean, it won a blind fight for me out of a bunch of hitter bottles, but really had to do these side by side. But what Jonathan and Jennifer are doing over there at K.Luke, their blending capabilities have obviously put K.Luke on the map. I mean, these are a hot commodity right now, and I can understand why. I think they put the time into it, and obviously they have a I guess a flavor profile in mind of what they want when they find it. I mean, it's just people are fans of it, regardless of the batch. Again, hell of a job here, guys, by K.Luke. So I thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of Dusty Dan's Whiskey Reviews. Guys, got to go find this K.Luke batch number 5, if there's still any out there. Not sure if they're still on the on their site or on CO Box or anything like that, or you might have to resort to the secondary market to find them. But definitely worth buying for sure. I think that with them putting out that batch 4, that was absolutely fantastic. And from what I heard, some of the prior batches to that were really good too. But batch 5 again is no joke. It's I let it open up a little bit before I reviewed it, just to see if that spice factor would kind of change and maybe settle down a little bit. And from what I remember, it kind of did. When I first opened this, it was very, very spicy on the back end as far as like baking spices, but. Now it seems like it toned down maybe a little bit. Those baking spices are definitely still there. They're definitely dominating the back of the palate, but it wasn't as big and bold and impactful as it was on that first sip in a good way. Jonathan, Jennifer, keep doing what you're doing. And again, guys, hell of a K.Luke batch number 5 here. So guys, if you're looking for more reviews like this, hit that subscribe button, bell notification to be alerted of any upcoming reviews or live streams. You also find me on Instagram at Dusty Dan's Whiskey Reviews. Until next time, guys, stay dusty.